Welcome to the SINGEL recordings. In this podcast, we share precious moments of reflection and debate that have taken place on our stage. You're listening to the first episode featuring Judith Butler, in which they discuss the concept of belonging while exploring themes such as power, justice, and violence. The interview was captured in the SINGEL's Blue Hall on the 27th of September 2025.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tim Taverna, and I work as a curator for the Talks and Debates program here at the SINGEL Art Center. First of all, I would like to thank you for being here tonight, for leaving your homes and coming together in this Blue Hall. I don't think I've ever seen so many familiar faces at a talk before. Many of my colleagues and friends are here, and I'm deeply grateful for that. We've been looking forward to this evening for quite some time, for several reasons. And I believe you too. No other event this season sold out so quickly. Listening to people who speak with knowledge about topics that are precious to us is important, and it will be important tomorrow. It's quite special to be here tonight with 1,000 people. The very first talk took place a few years ago in the garden of the SINGEL, and there were, let's say, 20 people. So what started in the garden as a small-scale project has now moved to the largest concert hall in the house. For me, it highlights the importance of having a conversation with your loved ones, your friends, your family. And however one might argue that the real conversation is under pressure today, your presence confirms that it is important. We now live in this strange world where every sentence, every word, every opinion can have their consequences. A speaker who was scheduled to give a lecture in Antwerp in January canceled because he was afraid he would not be able to return to the US. I quote from the last email. There are many of us here who feel things are completely out of control. We are impacted by the whims of an adult baby with too much power and a preference for guns. It makes us despair daily, and it impacts my ability to connect in person to excellent people. I treasure those experiences, so this decision is made with regret. Well, I'm happy Judith Butler has made it to Antwerp, and we are very honored that they are here tonight. Their oeuvre embraces a lifetime, just as it embraces the lifetime of its readers. Last Tuesday, writer Safa El-Khanoussi opened the season with an impressive opening lecture on the seasonal theme, Longing to Belong. And this evening continues on this topic and the question if we can take belonging for granted. Because what does belonging mean if it comes with exclusion, oppression, and violence? How can we build an ethics of non-belonging? Before we start, I would like to do a few announcements. We will probably finish around 9:30. It's good to know if you still have to catch a train or just want to go to bed on time. The conversation between Judith Butler and Sarah Bracke will be recorded and made available as a podcast. Bookstore Chronopio will host a book sale after the talk with the selection of Butler's work. This will take place at the Kunstenplein near the entrance hall, and there will also be the signing session. You had the opportunity to send in a question for Judith Butler. A selection of these questions will be answered by Butler during the evening. To conclude, I would like to thank a few people. Emma Smith from Wiley Agency, Ina from Bookstore Chronopio, Max Live for the subtitles, and of course my own colleagues, the technical team at the SINGEL, and my dear colleague Jessie for her support, commitment, and time. I hope to see you again soon, maybe at the next talk in October with French writer Constance Debré. And for now, I wish you all a very, very nice evening. I would like to give the floor to Sarah Bracke and Judith Butler. Thank you.
Wow, that's a welcome. Welcome, Judith. Welcome to Belgium. You've been in Brussels before. You've been in Liège, right?
Yes.
But you haven't been in Antwerp?
I don't think so.
So welcome to Antwerp.
Okay.
And also welcome to this great audience. We know that you have been eager for this conversation, so have I. And our conversation tonight starts indeed with the question of belonging in all of its layers and complexities. And I think we all in this room know what it means to desire to belong somewhere, to struggle to belong anywhere, and that includes the desire to break free from a place we might be told that we should belong there, but we don't feel at home, or from perhaps we used to belong there, but we don't fit anymore. So there's all of that that we all know very well. But then there also are the politics of belonging, whether it's on a national level, national belonging, or belonging to a bathroom, where belonging becomes policing of boundaries and borders. You do not belong here, in this country, in this bathroom. A violent and deadly enacting of boundaries and borders of belonging is what we are seeing all around us. And I also want to add, I am struck by and actually very troubled by how easily the idea of not feeling at home anymore, so not belonging, not feeling at home anymore, is offered as an explanation for popular support for all kind of racist, fascist, replacement, omvolking politics. I'm thinking of that book Strangers in Our Own Land by Arlie Hochschild and many other accounts that were offered soon after the first Trump administration of and there's a feeling of not belonging that pushes people towards those politics. Maybe we can come back to that. There's some trouble there, I think. But we start with, so the SINGEL is dedicating this season of cultural programming to the question of belonging, as you've already heard, and commissioned Safa El-Khanoussi to write this beautiful essay for the occasion. If you haven't done so, I would really warmly recommend everybody to pick up this brilliant and moving essay. You can find it in several places in this building. You can just pick it up and read it. In this essay, Safa takes us on a journey, an intellectual journey that connects insights from various thinkers and also filmmakers, the Palestinian Alaya Suleiman, and connects that with her personal journey as part of a North African diaspora, growing up in a fancy neighborhood in Amsterdam where police would be called if children who looked like Safa would linger too long in front of a shop. So the essay reflects on how this personal journey has fueled an interest in an existential and political need not to belong, the refusal to belong. And the essay does that in a very good company of thinkers like Eduardo Galeano, Achille Mbembe, Mohamed El-Kurt, and notably Edward Said, thinking of the beautiful essay Permission to Narrate, and Hannah Arendt and the figure of the pariah. And for those who haven't read the essay yet, and also especially for you, Judith, I would like to read just the end of the essay. I translated it in English and read the last paragraph. Sometimes our desire for freedom and self-determination requires that we refuse to participate in order for a new world to become possible. I refuse community in which my desires and my freedoms are guaranteed by the exploitation and powerlessness of another. And there is nothing altruistic about the refusal of this world. It comes from recognition. In the face of that outsider, without history or name, that face that I have seen thousands of times without actually seeing it, I recognize my own, in shock. Look Gazans in the eye, Isabella Hamad urges us, and say, that's me. Because of that resemblance that I did not see before, nothing about this life, which was so known and familiar to me, is still ordinary or self-evident. In this collective conspiracy of conscious pariahs, we give birth to new life. Only when we learn to appreciate the art of refusal can we truly feel at home. I conclude with the words of El-Kurt. I am grateful for my contempt because it gives me dignity and reminds me that I am a human being. So the essay is called On the Right to Refuse, insisting on the refusal to belong to a society in which the erasure of others is accepted to guarantee one's freedom and belonging. And that is the starting point of our conversation tonight. And Judith, I am hoping that you would be willing to give us an insight in how parts of your personal journey have fueled your intellectual work, and notably in relation to these existential and political questions of belonging, not belonging, refusing to belong. And so I was hoping you would be able to talk to that in three domains. And of course, we would have to start with gender. Of course. You were born more or less in the same year when the term gender, as we know it now, was coined, right? By John Money, the psychologist and sexologist, US-based, and this is in the mid-50s. And so in a sense, we could say that you and gender, you grew up together. You came of age together, right?
But I was also born on the day that Khrushchev announced socialism with a human face.
Okay. We will have to get to that as well. Okay. So on that fateful day, I am imagining growing up together with gender. I'm imagining you got into trouble with all kind of gender norms, maybe in the 1960s, the 1970s. And then it seemed that in the 1980s, you said, okay, this gender got me into trouble. I'm going to get this gender into trouble, right? And then the rest is history, gender trouble. So can you tell us a little bit about this gender belonging, non-belonging, and refusals in your life in relation to what then became your important intellectual contribution?
Great. Well, thank you, Sarah. And let me say first how pleased I am to be in conversation with you again. We have many years of conversation between us, all of which I'm most grateful for. And I want to thank SINGEL for inviting me here, and a gracious, generous invitation, and many of you I have never met before. I also just want to take a moment to say, on this day, the people of Gaza continue to be hurt, to be damaged, to be destroyed, and their ways of life, their cities, their shelters, their hospitals, their educational institutions have either been fully destroyed or on the way to being destroyed. And I know many of us have spoken up and done what we can to object to this ongoing genocide. And yes, it is a genocide. But our countries have collaborated. They have not undertaken boycott, divestment, and sanctions. They have not stopped the embargoes. They have not put an embargo on the arms trade. They have not used all of the economic, ethical pressure that they have at their disposal. And my country in particular is actively supporting and sometimes even directing the activities on the ground. So it is with great anger and great shame and great sorrow that we meet here today, and whatever we speak about, we must also be speaking about Gaza. We can't turn away, and not because when we look at them we see ourselves. We see someone else. We see another group of people, a group of people who are less protected than most of us. And we also must see that difference. Not to berate ourselves or to wallow in guilt, but to understand the operation of power, the violent operation of power that establishes an entire group of people as dispensable, as worthy of being killed, as ungrievable, as not belonging to the humanity to which we ostensibly belong. But we are, of course, those of us who are indirectly responsible, and certainly those who are directly responsible, have lost some part of their own humanity because of what we have permitted. Yep. And what we permit still. So I say this so that we can acknowledge this vast failure of human ethical obligation during this time in human history. I am not sure how anyone will recover from the devastations that have been wrought there. Yeah. And it brings up fundamental questions of belonging. Yeah. You know, in the beginning, yes, of course, in the beginning was gender. It's like, oh, here's Judith. Judith's a girl, right? So, yes, in the beginning was gender, yeah. Right? But, you know, I'm also Yehudit. I'm Judith. I'm the Jewish girl. I am the feminine form of the Jewish child. So, my gender, my name, my religion, all came in a single blow. An interpolation, a very strong interpolation. But I had no idea what any of that would mean, except when an infant is named or an infant is brought into the world, as I was in the mid-50s, as you know, televisions were being installed in homes, as the aftermath of the Nazi genocide was felt throughout my family, who lost family there. My grandparents speaking Yiddish. You know, I mean, I was American, but I was also linked to a European history that was in my house and in my education and in my world. But what I want to say is that we never know what those expectations are that come with the name. So, little Judith, little Yehudit, Shana Peril is my Yiddish name. I don't know who follows that. Somebody does. See, I knew there was somebody who did. Why? What were they expecting from me? Terrible. But you don't know those expectations, but they come at you.
Yeah.
They come at you, and they include things like normative gender and being a girl, or being a Zionist, or being part of the Jewish community that has a consensus on Zionism. Although in the mid-50s, in the United States, there was no absolute consensus on Zionism.
Yeah.
It didn't really emerge until after the '67 war. You could have open debates in the mid-1950s in Jewish communities on Zionism. And if you were against Zionism, you were, that was a position you had. It didn't make you an anti-Semite. It made you, if you were Jewish, you were just another Jewish anti-Zionist. You could be a Bundist, you could be a Universalist, you could say diaspora is the place to be, we like diaspora. There were many ways of being Jewish, and people didn't look at each other and say, oh, you have that opinion, you must be a self-hating Jew, or you must be an anti-Semite. Yeah. But I'm just putting these two together in a way, Sarah, because I don't know. Was I gendered before I was Jewish? Was I Jewish before I was gendered? Was I gendered Jewish gendered? I don't know. But I was also Ashkenazi, so I was white. Yeah. And I was white in a time in which the neighborhoods in which I was living were starting to be integrated. So there was a consciousness of being white. And there was not yet a civil rights movement, but that did start when I was, in my mind, it came to my mind when I was 7, and I was aware that there was a struggle and that people were not treated equally and that they were excluded from neighborhoods and that they did not belong. And I had a sense that I did belong because I was in a Jewish community that made sure we belonged, but I was also aware that if you went to a different part of town, you didn't belong.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, belonging and non-belonging seems to me very often to be a struggle. For the most part, I felt that belonging was a way of being absorbed into other people's beliefs. Like, oh, I'm going to belong to this or that community. That means I must conform. Yeah. So I was always...
But you were never good in that.
I was very ambivalent.
Yeah.
Even now, like, there are these excellent groups on campus that are fighting for the freedom of Palestinians. And of course, I support them totally. But the minute they ask me to sign an oath, I'm like, I'm not signing an oath.
You're not signing?
I don't sign oaths. Yeah. So I'm willing to risk not belonging if it feels like coercion.
Yeah. But I can imagine as you tell the story now that indeed it just all, the interpolations are entangled and come as a blow, as you said, come on you. But then in your intellectual work, you wrote this book, Gender Trouble. Mm-hmm. And then, maybe 2 decades later, you wrote Parting Ways in relation to Zionism. So then intellectually, you started to disentangle some of these questions to really unpack what is the problem with gender norms and gender normativity, or unpack, and I think I still remember having a conversation with you before Parting Ways, when you were finishing the book, before it came out, when it felt very uneasy. I think I remember you saying, like, I'm nervous about this book, I'm nervous about putting it out there. So in your intellectual work, while in your lived life, of course, it is all entangled, but then in your intellectual work, you did begin tackling some of these things that came as a blow to you, no?
Well, it's always hard, this moment to explain, but there's certain things that became known publicly at certain times. Okay, so before Gender Trouble, I was just working in continental philosophy, and then I wrote something on gender, and people said, "Oh, you became interested in gender." It's like, no, I was interested in gender my whole life.
Yeah.
I just happened to write something.
Yeah.
So if you ask me about Zionism, like, oh, you turned to Zionism. Did I turn to Zionism in 2013, 14 to write a book? No. I was struggling with Zionism my whole life.
Yeah.
And in my 20s, fighting against my formation, realizing through a fair amount of study what I had been taught about the Zionist colonization of Palestine, never used the word colonization, and never acknowledged the radical dispossession, the land theft, the violence, or indeed the massacres that led to 1948. And even in 48, I wasn't taught at all about the different options there were for state formation that were actively debated and indeed continued to be debated through the 60s. I was told something false, and I was given a very romantic idea of Jewish sanctuary in the land of Palestine. But when you write a book on it and you go public, you lose your family.
Your family.
You lose your community. You can't go home again.
Yeah.
So there are 2 or 3 members of my family who still speak to me, but I've never been able to go home again.
Even now.
And you risk that.
Yeah.
You risk it. It's a very hard loss.
Yeah.
But that is a refusal to participate.
Yeah.
That comes with a loss. But at the same time, there are all these other people who are refusing to participate.
Yeah.
And then you've got a new community. Then you've got a new community. And plus, it's not just your Jewish pals, it's your Jewish and your Palestinian pals. And it's a bunch of other people, too, from various backgrounds who are coming into like a strong, multicultural, multilingual discussion about anti-Zionism or about Palestinian freedoms or about new state formations or about resistance movements and how best to conduct them and what aspirations there might be. So, I got adopted into other communities where belonging was better. But belonging...
Yeah? Belonging?
I never want belonging to be complete.
Yeah.
I feel like if any of us completely belonged somewhere, we would be absorbed and captured. I know that when you belong nowhere, the desire to belong is absolutely crucial, right? So when Hannah Arendt says, we all have a right to have rights, and then she continues that to explicate a right to belong to a polity, right, to a society. So the right of belonging is one that she insisted on, and it became the basis for her own thinking about the rights of refugees. Yeah. She herself had been one. So the right to belong is an enormously important right, and it's not even an individual right. It's a shared right. It's a shared condition of life. When you say we each have the right to belong, you're saying we belong to a shared condition of life, and we should equally belong to that shared condition. Yeah. And the problem with Eichmann, in her view, is that he didn't realize that we all belonged, and he thought he could decide who belonged to the living and who did not, who could share in this life and who could not share in this life. But even longing to belong from the place of radical exclusion usually comes with some criticism of what it might mean to belong. Because if belonging is assimilation to the point where I must efface my history, or if it's conformity to a set of norms that are excluding others, well then, no, I want to belong, but I want to keep a critical relationship to the norms that we share, including the norms we don't yet share and that we should share, right? More radical ideas of shared existence than those that exist for us now. So I think the critical spirit has to interrupt and coincide with the desire to belong. That there should always be a disturbance in the sphere of belonging.
Yeah, and indeed, I like how you put it, that it should never be complete because of, well, the potential violence and exclusion that is enacted when a belonging is complete, right?
Well, the absolute conformity.
And the conformity.
Right, complete belonging is, you know, is that it can be, it's not always, but it can be a radical conformity that overcomes difference. And I think we must keep difference alive, including those differences that make us question, oh, what does it mean to belong?
Yep.
Who belongs? What are the terms of belonging? Maybe we need to change the terms of belonging.
Yeah.
Right, to keep it active and keep it living and keep it expansive.
Yeah. I do want to come back to gender.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. You can't escape it, Judith. So in, I think it was 2020, right? You formally changed your gender to non-binary in the state of California, right? And so non-binary, for you, is that a matter of belonging or non-belonging?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. Yes, good. Do you want to explain that?
You just asked the wrong person.
I asked the wrong person. And I asked the binary question, which I shouldn't have done. But do you want to explain that, or is the answer no?
You know, it's interesting because, you know, a lot of people think that gender is a matter of choice, and the question is, you know, what gender do you want to be? Like, oh, what gender do you want to be? Well, I want to be this gender. I want to be this gender. My question has always been, what does gender want of me?
Good.
Right? Because it's making demands all the time, and I'm like, oh, God, I can't do that. I can't do that. It talks at you, trips you up. You're like trying to go to the store, and there's gender. Somebody says something to you. Boy, I felt bad for the guy who said monsieur to me the other day, and then he was like, you know, he just didn't know whether that was right. And I couldn't reassure him because I didn't know what was right.
You didn't know either, yeah.
And I saw he was suffering, but I just had no way. I just had no way to help him. I know, I'm sorry. I would have a late night television comedy show, but they would cancel me.
They would, in the US, they would cancel you. But having said that, in which country? Okay, now we have to think countries where this would not be canceled. But so, okay.
I'm sorry.
No, stop being sorry.
I'm non-binary. Look, non-binary, I feel like at the time that I wrote Gender Trouble, calling into question the binary was a critical activity.
Yeah.
It never occurred to me that you could identify as non-binary.
Yeah.
It seemed to me that non-binary thinking was about disidentifying with available categories. But of course, I also said at that time that categories change, and that there might be new ones. And people would always ask me, oh, like what kind? I said, I don't know, that's for you to figure out. But non-binary became, oddly, a category. And then I thought, okay, in some ways, with many other people, I helped to make it.
You did, Judith, yeah.
But with many other people, and
Yeah.
a lot of people mean things by it that I don't mean, and it's now definitely in the hands of others. But I thought, well, why not? If there is such a category, why not? And I could not think of a good reason not to. But do I identify in the sense of a strong feeling like, yes, this is who I am?
No.
Better that than some others.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, but it is true that my relationship to categories is kind of permanently queer. So maybe I'm a little more queer than I am non-binary, or I have a queer relation to non-binary. I think that's probably right.
So given all this, do we actually still need gender? And I am asking this question because in your latest book, Who's Afraid of Gender, you kind of raise the question as well, right? Do we still need gender? Or at least you show how gender has become this phantasm, this deep bundle of deep desires and anxieties about the world at large that is put together, projected on gender. Can we still do something there? Or is it time to move on and let the phantasm devour itself?
Well, unfortunately, the right-wing construction of gender, and I use that word purposefully, the right-wing anti-gender ideology movement is construing gender all the time as something that is destructive. It's either a form of indoctrination, it's a form of totalitarianism. You have done excellent work in this area, and in fact, I rely on your scholarship here to a large degree. But that construction effaces the ways in which gender has been important as part of anti-discrimination law, as part of social movements against rape and domestic violence and domestic rape. It effaces the way in which gender has permitted for the change in civil status. Like, if I can become non-binary, that means that this is a legal and historical category that can shift, or that I can shift or move between it. That's an exercise of freedom for me to make use of the law in that way. Gender is also a framework, in scholarship that allows us to ask, well, why is the world organized in this way? And is it necessary that it is? So it's not just an identity, it's also the framework in which we ask fundamental questions about power differentials and how they work through categorization and how they work through practices and institutions and state policies. We wouldn't we can't even think socially, ethically, politically about healthcare without understanding gender and different kinds of healthcare that people need depending on their relation to gender or how they are constituted biologically and socially and culturally and legally. So I think there's no doing away with gender. Doing away with gender is what the right wing wants us to do. Yeah. And they are trying to do away with gender by offering this deformation of scholarship and political policy as the truth of gender. So we must oppose the untruth. They're also practicing a version of social construction that I oppose.
Yeah.
All right? I mean, they are constructing gender. Yeah. They are showing that gender can be constructed. Yeah. They are the ultimate constructivists.
The ultimate?
I think so. Yes, because if you believe the caricature of social construction, Like,
Okay.
oh, you think
Okay.
gender can be whatever you want
Every
it to be.
morning you get up and
or
you choose,
can
yeah.
just say what gender is and that's what gender is. Like, no. These are, the history of gynecology, the history of rape, the institutionalized sexism, the deep transphobia that we find in several institutions. I mean, no, we're talking about forms of power that are sedimented and difficult to change and that must change. So, in that sense, we can't just decide what gender is going to mean, because indeed it acts on us way before we start acting on it, right? It lays in wait for us. It's the blow, as it were, that greets you when you're born. With all of the institutional apparatus and the phantasmatic investments of not just parents, but institutions and religious institutions. So, we can't do away with gender as if it's like an arbitrary framework. It's not. It's a form of power that is interconnected with race and class and capitalism and geopolitical movements and colonization. It would be at our peril that we would do away with gender.
Yeah, it's just I want to do away with the phantasm, but yes.
Well,
Indeed.
but the one problem is that it always has that dimension.
Yeah, it just seems to be out of control at
It
this
is out of
moment in
control. Yes.
time.
Yes.
So how not to feed the phantasm? But yes, indeed, yeah, everything that you said.
But we can't step away from the
But
field,
yeah.
because then they do win.
Yeah. They will not win. We can't let them win.
Okay, all right.
But it does bring me to another domain, or that I would still like to question you about, the questions of belonging, non-belonging, and refusals. Institutions. And I'm saying this both because I know many of us have to deal with institutions, whether it's like we deal with academic institutions, cultural institutions, educational institutions. And I'm also saying this because many here in this room have heard the news that your institution, UC Berkeley, has given the names of 160 students and faculty, handed it over like that to the Trump administration for alleged complaints of anti-Semitism, and your name being the most prominent one on that list. And there's no words for the betrayal, right? Like there are no internal complaint procedures were followed. There's no words for this betrayal of just UC Berkeley giving the names to the Trump administration. So what do we do with these institutions? And I am reminded of earlier this year, it's still not a year has gone, I mean, it's been relentless months, right? But earlier this year when the Trump administration came into office, many of us, I think many in the US, but also many here, were reading Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, right? The lessons of, Snyder's lessons of what to do with authoritarianism and the rise of authoritarianism. And the first lesson being, do not obey in advance, where I think you see a little bit of like the liberal quality of Snyder's thought, right? Because you could also make it do not obey, right? But okay, do not obey in advance. And then the second lesson is defend our institutions. Media, universities, all kind of institutions. But how do we defend these institutions where we, first of all, might have never belonged, and that continue to betray us? And in this case, that you have been so betrayed by this institution. So how do we say we don't defend these institutions anymore? Which, again, that would be, I guess, very difficult to say. But at the same time, how do we defend these institutions?
Well, it's interesting because I had a phone conversation with the head of legal counsel at the University of California at Berkeley, and he was explaining that the university was being investigated by the federal government for anti-Semitism, and there's an anti-discrimination policy called Title VI, which every university has to conform to, and it has to show that it has in place procedures that would handle complaints against faculty, students, staff, for racism, for anti-Semitism, for the discrimination against people with disabilities, discrimination on the basis of religion, nationality, all of these. So Title VI actually requires that each institution has procedures through which complaints go, so that everybody gets heard, those who have been accused understand the accusation, can give their side of the story, and it can be adjudicated in a fair way. But the Trump administration decided that the way it wants to test for conformity to Title VI, right, is the institution doing what it needs to do to handle complaints of this sort, especially complaints or accusations of anti-Semitism. They wanted all of the allegations that have ever been made, even especially those that never were processed. So they were not testing to see whether the internal procedure of the university was working. They were telling the university to suspend their internal procedure and just give the names of anyone who has been accused or whose name is associated with an accusation. So I don't know whether I was accused.
Yeah.
All I know is that my name is in a file having to do with, pertaining to, an accusation of anti-Semitism. So it's like,
so you don't know
it's
if you're
pure
accused?
associate. I don't know if I'm accused.
And if
I don't
you're
know if
accused
I'm
of what?
associated with
Yeah.
an unsubstantiated accusation. Someone could have just said there's a rumor, or I heard a story, hearsay, rumor, slur, slander. It's like, okay, we'll take all of that.
Take all of that. And you don't know.
And I don't know.
So
and
this is like Kafka.
Well, but then when I say to the legal counsel, can I know what's in the file? He said, no, you cannot know what's in the file. And I said, did you think about not complying?
Yes. Do not
And
obey.
and he said, no. I said, may I ask why you did not think about that? Why did you not consider not complying? And he said, it is my job to defend the institution. And then my answer to him, he said, well, of course, sometimes we do the wrong thing and I make sure damages are paid. It's like, oh, yeah. But then I said to him, is it your job to defend the highest ideals of the institution? Quiet. So when Snyder says defend our institutions, he might mean defend the highest ideals of the institutions or defend educational institutions against the kind of extortion and destruction to which they're subject. But you know, Snyder would get rid of literary criticism and literary theory and post-structuralism and Derrida and Butler. So he has some good things to say, and then he has some other things to say.
I know. And it all shows in advance. It's just do not obey.
But it's also, like, why is it tyranny? Tyranny comes to us from the Roman tradition, really. Like, why isn't it authoritarianism or fascism?
Yeah.
Anyway, he's useful.
To some extent. But many of us were reading it, right?
Yes, of course.
Plus, he made his book into a graphic novel, and
Yes.
that helps. Make your book into a graphic novel.
I know. He sold many more copies than I did. I am aware.
Yeah.
But look, let me just say one other thing here, which is that, you know, institutions, educational institutions in Europe, in the US, in Australia, throughout the world, have been subject to a massive neoliberal takeover. And most of the people who now run institutions are not academics, but corporate,
Managers.
corporate managers, okay? And that kind of rationality is now running institutions. So when institutions of higher education become completely neoliberalized, they lose the capacity to say what value they have in the world, right? Because the values are all neoliberal values of, efficiency and economy and functionalism and the like. We don't even talk about free and open inquiry. We don't talk about knowledge or what it means to learn how to read, think, to assess your world, to come up with judgments, to use evidence, and how important that is for democratic deliberation and for the future of democracy. We don't link universities to democracy anymore. No. We link them to certain forms of corporate rationality and profit. And grant making and grant receiving, especially from the government. Yeah. And once that happens and the government can say, oh, we're going to take all your funding away or a lot of your funding so that you're not going to be able to function unless you hand over these names. Yeah.
Because these governments are linking it to democracy.
They are, but
they are making the link. And
but
the
educational leaders are only concerned about keeping those grants because that's the only rationality they are working with, and they become moral cowards, and they sell out their communities. And at Berkeley, it's not just students, some of whom are international and can have their visas taken away in a moment, and faculty, some of whom are not tenured and are not protected by academic freedom, but administrative staff, people who've worked there for 20 or 25 years who depend on the longevity of their work in order to get a pension. So these are people's livelihoods that are being just bargained away. Yeah. Okay, we don't have to spend all my time on that, but it is happening everywhere.
But it's happening everywhere.
And the capitulation is appalling.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is happening everywhere. That's why we have to find a way to, the do not obey within institutions, but I think you're very right to bring it back to the ideals and the values of what...
Yes, but, the thing is that when I was talking to the legal counsel, I realized he'd never read Hannah Arendt, right?
That is the problem.
But I thought, there's in philosophy 101, in political philosophy 101, it's like, oh, there's a set of laws. Do you obey the laws? Do you not obey the laws? What if the laws are unjust laws? Oh, do I obey an unjust law or do I refuse to obey an unjust law? It's like basic thinking, which is also basic thinking about civil disobedience and the question of whether the law that's being imposed on you is just or unjust, which means the question of justice can't be answered simply through recourse to law, right? We need to have a framework of justice to distinguish between good and bad law, just and unjust law. But civil disobedience is not just one act, a heroic act of someone who says no. It's a way of building community. Yeah. It's a way of building collectivities, and it actually is a way of believing in and pursuing a just world that the law cannot necessarily give us, and give us a perspective on law so that we are not just compliant. It involves collectivity, imagination, and critical judgment. Yeah. And that's part of what we can learn through this resistance movement, which has now taken all kinds of forms, including a massive sanctuary movement in the United States, which is helping the undocumented and those who have been targeted.
And this to me links to, the issue of ethics and world making, right? I mean, and
Yes.
also community, but also really world making. And I want to link that back to our question of belonging, non-belonging, and the refusals to belong. So how do we do ethics? What is an ethics based on that not absolute belonging? So kind of the ambiguity of belonging, non-belonging, the refusals, because it seems to me that we have, that there is a sense that we sometimes need strong grounds of belonging in order to do world making and to have an ethics of that world making, whereas if we start from a more precarity of belonging or a more ambiguity of belonging, and take the violence that claims of belonging inflict on others into account from the outset, how does ethics and world making look like? Can you expand on that? Like, we've already heard the figure of the conscious pariah from Hannah Arendt. You've already referred to Hannah Arendt. So we can think about this with Hannah Arendt. I think we can also think with Edward Said about this and the idea of out of place and the world making that we can do in relation to a notion of out of place. And how do we think with Judith Butler about this? I mean, of course, you take Arendt and Said with you, but I would really like to hear you more on that ethics, because it feels like it's an ethics that part of it might already be there, but we also really need to imagine it for that new world to be possible.
I mean, maybe we need to distinguish between, say, forms of nationalism that also rely on an idea of belonging, forms of racism, which you actually alluded to earlier, like the forms of racism we find among Trump supporters or Orban supporters or even Meloni supporters, right? Or
Vlaams Belang supporters.
Yes, exactly. Just around the corner. There is a kind of furious nostalgia among racists. They want to get back to the time in which everybody was white and it was fine and there was superiority, and there was dominance, and there were lots of privileges that were accorded to whiteness, which have now been contested, and rightly so in our view, but in their view, they've been diminished. And they understand equality as a form of castration.
Yeah.
Like, you know, what they've lost actually is supremacy.
Yeah.
But very often the language that is used is belonging.
Yeah. And not feeling at home.
Not feeling at home on their soil, you know, in their land. Because, of course, many people are now in their land and on that soil, and it is shared among us. But the idea of a shared condition of life, shared among those with different backgrounds, different histories, different languages, different orientations, but nevertheless shared, I mean, that could be a beautiful vision. I think it is a beautiful vision. I think we need to make it more beautiful. But it's hateful to some for whom homogeny and whiteness in particular and its supremacy were the only way they had of understanding belonging.
Yep.
So one is not dispossessed by the difference of another, right? One is not dispossessed. One is confronted with a new condition of sharing. one is confronted with human complexity, with various histories, with various religious backgrounds. And there is conflict, and there is unknowingness, and there are epistemic limits that people come up against. That's true. But what does it mean to be committed to the struggle of understanding the radical heterogeneity and complexity of human life and human histories in a world in which our lives are converging all the time? There's an ethics to that. Yeah. There's not one standard of belonging, but belonging becomes something like a commitment to the struggle to share the earth, and a commitment to the struggle to preserve the earth that we share. So the ecological struggle is absolutely connected to the struggle for equality. Yeah. Absolutely connected. They can't be disconnected. I just think ethics struggle translation, right? Like literally and maybe also figuratively being open to the language of the other. Not assuming that the epistemic framework through which I see the world is the way everyone should see the world, undoing that arrogance, that imperialism of the everyday in our interactions. That is an ethic. It's a form of world making, but it does involve struggle, difference, sometimes anger, sometimes disbelief, sometimes hostility, right? But all of these things, including hostility, are ethical problems. Yeah. What do we do with our hostility? How do we live our hostility? What can we make out of hostility? Muhammad al-Kurd talked about his contempt. Yeah. But if we asked him, and I don't know how to do that, do you want to make a full life out of contempt? Or is dignity something you're striving for all humans? My guess would be that he has contempt for all those who refuse the dignity of other humans, and that he is struggling to distribute dignity radically, right? Like a world in which dignity is radically distributed, and not by some sovereign power, but by each other all the time, right? As a reciprocal action of life. I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy, you know. I think I was talking to a group in Spain who were interested in the problem of peace, and they said, you know, peace has been just thrown out. Like, nobody talks about peace anymore. And I thought, well, the Oslo Accords made peace really hard to talk about, since that was a really painful, broken promise, and is surely part of the history of what we're seeing on the ground there today in Palestine. But what if we didn't separate peace from conflict, aggression, exasperation, murderous impulse? In other words, what if all of that negativity was part of peace, right? Like you want to destroy, or you understand the desire to destroy, and you don't. You do something else with it. You cultivate your rage into art.
Rage rooms. Oh,
you
okay.
Cultivate your, go ahead. No.
I said no, rage rooms.
Rage rooms, or
art.
Or maybe you build some rooms with your rage, you know? Maybe you build something with your rage.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to be done with rage, including dancing. No, seriously. I mean, it's not about obliterating all those emotions that are destructive. It's about learning how to work with those feelings, as unbearable as they are, to make a world together. Yeah. And that's not easy. No. But it's not just about being loving all the time.
No. Yeah.
I mean, it could be very tough love, right? It could be very rough love. And I think we don't understand those practices of constructive conflict as well as we might. We tend to suppress them out of fear. And we would rather just dwell in the domain of peaceable love. And I understand that. I would like some peaceable love myself.
But I mean, thank you for, you are doing that work to make this ethic of, commitment to shared conditions of life, to sharing the earth, to shared humanity, to make it more beautiful. I think we do need more of that ethics and world building. I do have a little question. I'm also thinking of time, but I do think, how do we really make it work? So I want to move now towards how can we make some of these things work more concretely, right? And ethics and world making without a solid framework of law, international law, human rights, right to asylum, genocide convention, the entire framework that was born out of the genocide of the Second World War, which is crumbling now. And, and I don't know if this is a fair way of putting it, but it keeps on coming back to my mind when after the Holocaust, Adorno spoke about, I mean, I know there's some misquotation here as well, but, the possibility of poetry after the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And the possibility of international law after Gaza, right? How can we even imagine? So this ethics sounds like entirely what we need to do now. And I think we need those frameworks, or do we need other frameworks?
Well, we do need Francesca Albanese to stay.
We need a Francesca Albanese. Okay. Yes.
I mean, and she's on that flotilla. I hope she's on it and she's okay.
Yeah.
I worry. But look, if you go back, I have two answers for you, one of which is the following. If we go back to the Genocide Convention and look at what Raphael Lemkin had to say about what it is to try to destroy the life of a people, he was very clear that genocides destroy lives, take bodies, murder, deliberately, through targeted action, absolutely. They also destroy forms of life, by which he means all the institutions that allow for life to be reproduced. So we might think along the lines of social reproduction, right? And on healthcare, shelter, education. So the destruction of hospitals, the destruction of food sources, the tactical starvation, the destruction of almost every educational institution are all ways of trying to make sure that the life of the Palestinian people cannot be reproduced, that their future will be foreclosed. It's an attack on the future, which is what Karma Nabulsi says when she's defining scholasticide, to destroy educational institutions that belong to a people is to destroy the possibility of the future, and in her language also the very ability to imagine a future. So to assassinate the imagination. But there's poetry coming out of Gaza still.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure they've ever read Adorno, and if they did, they're probably not going to pay attention to that. But seriously, I just want to say here that the alliances that have formed to support Palestine, to insist upon the end of the genocidal attacks, to dignify the Palestinian people, these alliances are enormously important. They are also full of conflict. People arguing about armed resistance, no armed resistance. People arguing about what place Jews have, what place non-Jews have. I mean, we know this. Not all of these groups get along, and yet they're struggling in some way without resolution. And sometimes, and I think this is maybe the most important point I would say about belonging. It's going to sound maybe a little bit silly, but I remember as a young person going to feminist meetings or women's studies gatherings, and everyone would have to say something about their identity, whether or not they were feminists, and then again, you'd have to say whether you were lesbian or straight, or you had to show an identity card of some kind to get into this meeting, or to march with these people, and you had to be checked at the gate, right?
I remember those.
But we started to act like the police, right? Which was a mistake, because you can't have a liberatory movement that starts to act like the police.
Yep.
But when we realized what we were fighting against, like, for instance, the letting die of gay men, of sex workers, of drug users from HIV, when we understood what we were struggling against, we arrived together with our conflicts unresolved. Our conflicts remained unresolved, and maybe still do. We didn't belong to each other because we recognized that we were the same or that we had the exact same views on all issues, but we did know what we opposed. We did know, and we do know now, that we opposed genocide. So I think that coalitions that are based not on ideals of belonging, but rather on a clarity about what we oppose and why, bring people together and allow people to transform their conflicts because they keep in mind what is most important.
Yeah. And actually, you also, in Who's Afraid of Gender, this is how you start the conclusion of that book, right? With that quote from Bernice Johnson Reagan. If you're in a coalition and you're comfortable, it's not a broad enough coalition, which ties in with that as well. And I think that is really the moment to keep this in mind.
Yes, I'm more comfortable with discomfort than most people I know in coalitions.
Yeah, okay. Yes. So we should cultivate our discomfort.
I think it's not something we have to resolve right away, because there's critical potential there. Yeah. Something maybe is not quite right. Something is not going the way it should, and yet we're still working together.
Yeah.
And both of those things can be true.
Yeah.
And I don't think coalitions are love, by the way.
Coalitions are...
They're not love.
Love?
I know some people think solidarity is love. I mean, Michael Hart says solidarity is love.
Oh, yes.
Maybe it is in some way I haven't fathomed.
But wait, Uriah Butelja...
I think it might be Christian. It might be Christian.
It might be Christian. No, but Uriah Butelja speaks of radical love, right?
Radical
but that's
love.
a different tradition.
All right. I have to learn this.
You have to learn about radical love?
Yeah, I have to learn more about that.
Okay. Okay. But I want to come back to something that you leave us with in Who's Afraid of Gender. You mention, different kinds of labor that we can do in relation to these various kinds of rising fascisms around us. I think actually one you've already addressed, which is the labor of the coalitions and being uncomfortable. But there's also 3 kinds of labor that you mention, and I think, so the critique, so we need to critique, we need to unpack arguments, develop better arguments. Also, actually, critique at this stage also means just fact-checking and coming up with the right facts as one kind of labor. A second kind of labor, we need to do the political strategic work of understanding where we can pull the plug of some of these discourses, which sometimes means not responding immediately or not on their terms. And so really that strategic labor. And the third one is the work of imagination, right? So the artists, the narratives, cultivating the imagination. And I think this might be a good moment to check in with our eager audience to understand, who we have available to do all of that labor. So if I'm looking at the technician, if we could get a little bit of light so that we see our audience. Oh, wow, we see our audience. And if maybe people are up to a show of hands of who in personal or professional capacity, it doesn't have to be professional capacity, is doing this critique work, like the fact checks, coming up with the better arguments, critiquing the frames that are out there. Could we see a raise of hands?
Here's some folks. There's a lot of folks. Good for you.
Wow. Good, great. Amazing. Okay, great. Thank you. And who is doing the political strategic work? Personal or professional capacity, it could be, I don't know, in the political parties, the trade unions, but really also the work of understanding, how to make a political move in these difficult landscapes. Trying to see who does that kind of work. Okay, that's a little bit less. I think we need more of those, right? Yeah, great. And who is doing the work of imagination?
Yes.
And also, by the way, none of this is binary or you have to choose. You can do all of it, right? Okay. Who is doing the imagination work, the narratives, the artists, the personal or professional capacity?
Look at that. Yeah, you're the future.
But my point was going to be, actually, I think your point in the book is that the future is all of this together.
Yes, it is.
It's working together, right? So yeah. So we have an army here of, people, check each other out, see if you can do some of the work together, of the kind of works the labor that we need in these times. And maybe this is also a good time to turn to some of the questions from the audience. So some of you have sent in some questions, and the first one, I'm giving you this one, Judith, is how would you tackle the growing polarization in a classroom caused by the influence of extremism and the manosphere on social media? People want answers, Judith.
No, I mean, I think I have maybe an answer that's actually very practical. I think we need to be teaching social media in the classroom. Like, what is social media? How does it work? Who owns it? Well, how do algorithms work? How can we develop a critical relationship to social media? I have a friend who gives an entire course on Wikipedia. Like, how do you read the information you're getting there? What's the evidence? How do you check it? What do you do with it? I think it needs to be part of not just media studies in this part of the university and not in another. It actually probably needs to be part of almost every classroom, because it's not just young people, it's all kinds of people are basing their understanding of social reality on what they're getting through social media, and in particular the excitations of the manosphere. There are those in the United States who think, we need to occupy the manosphere and turn the manosphere to the left. And it's like, no, I don't think so. But we do need also gender studies to tell us a little bit about what's going on with white masculinity and its resentments, especially among young men who are sometimes incels or understand themselves both as excluded, as non-belonging, and as profoundly entitled. What is that formation? We need a lot more work on that, and that should also be on social media. So the point is that we need to use the media to get out our idea of the world we'd like to live in, the positive values we'd like to see embodied, and make it compelling and make it exciting, because excitement and fantasy is all on the side of the right now.
We want it back.
I think. But not to use their tactics against them, but to use the media in a way that might be able to make our more compelling version of the world possible. I know that the media is not neutral, right? I mean, I'm not naive in this way, but I do think we should be teaching the economics and politics of social media in our universities, because otherwise we stand no chance of producing forms of knowledge that are grounded and convincing.
Thank you. And then we have another question. How can leaders in male-dominant organizations, such as the military, integrate intersectionality in their diversity and inclusion policies?
Well, look, I'm just going to say that I think maybe we just start with the fact of male-dominated organizations, right? Like, what are the male-dominated organizations of the world? Certainly the military is one, but there are others. The military is the arm of the state. We might start with the state. We might start with other kinds of institutions within civil society. And certainly patriarchal organization, legacy, transmission is huge. To the degree that it is also bound up with a certain relationship to violence or an expanded or self-serving notion of self-defense, I think we need to think about that critically and work to undo such institutions. I think if we are able to undo or seriously challenge the patriarchal organization of these organizations, then something that we could call intersectionality or diversity or radical difference would emerge as either part of the institution or as the point of view through which the institution would be dismantled altogether, right? So I've always been less interested in making the military more feminist. I've always thought that a feminist critique of militarization might continue to be the most important way to go.
Thank you. And our last question, what advice would you give to young trans folks who are trying to navigate and build livable lives while facing the current political regression and erosion of queer rights? Yeah.
I have to say something other than I'm absolutely appalled by what trans youth have to face right now. Yeah. But I guess I have to start there. To deny health care, appropriate gender-affirming health care to trans youth is to do harm. It's to withhold health care. It's to damage their well-being. And yet, somehow healthcare is held up as damaging. I think the withholding of healthcare is damaging. To say, oh, you can't read books about young trans people, or in which young trans people's lives are being represented in the complexity that they are, because that would be damaging. Well, no, it's damaging to ban books. It's damaging to withhold knowledge of the complexity of human life, especially of the lives of those who are struggling on the margins to gain recognition, to gain the right to live freely without fear of discrimination and violence. So I think maybe the real question is, what about the rest of us? Maybe we are the ones who have to become the allies of trans youth. Maybe we need to listen to that youth and not do as some of my feminist friends have done and then failed to listen or shut it down or shut it out. because it doesn't conform with their older idea of what feminism is. No, feminism that's transphobic is, in my mind, not feminism. So maybe the question is, what can the rest of us do for trans youth? I suppose I would have been a trans youth had that been an available category. And when was it again? But seriously, way back.
Last century.
Okay. But seriously, I think networks of solidarity, getting people to get the health care they need, making sure there are safe spaces, making sure young people get to find their way with the full support of their families, their educational institutions, and their religious institutions. That's what we can do. We can do that outside of state policy when it's not in conformity with our values. We can do it against state policy if we need to. We can also struggle for new state policy, as we are doing in the United States, given the transphobic agenda of the Trump administration. In any case, more than anything, listen to what trans kids have to say in whatever way they want to say it, and be available for that accompaniment.
Yeah. Thank you, Judith. And I also want to point to this. You've been, like tonight, on many other occasions, also in many of the books, and I think especially in Who's Afraid of Gender, you've been giving so much wisdom, insights in a very generous way, and also advice. I mean, for a moment I was thinking you were talking about having a talk show earlier on, but you could also have like these advice columns, right? Ask Judith, right?
Yeah.
Like, ask Judith, right? So, but you have been, and I think in this book, we just checked in the audience the kind of things that we can actually do. And I want to, I have one more question for you, and that is maybe in the same vein. There's another kind of labor that we can do that you address in Who's Afraid of Gender, and that pertains to trauma. And you write, and this is precisely in the chapter about the TERFs, the trans exclusionary radical feminists like J.K. Rowling. And so you write this, and I quote, "Living in the repetitive temporality of trauma does not always give us an adequate account of social reality. In fact, the reality of the trauma we suffer makes it difficult to distinguish between what we most fear and what is actually happening, what happened in the past, and what is happening now. It takes careful work for those distinctions to emerge in a stable form for clear judgment." So you wrote this on the TERF, the trans-exclusionary radical feminist phantasm of the danger of trans women, that trans women would allegedly pose in public bathrooms. But I think you are also making a larger point. So can you, as a last question, tell us a little bit more on how you see taking care of trauma as part of working towards justice?
It's a great question. I had some compassion for J.K. Rowling because she came forth with her own personal history of being sexually violated. And unfortunately, many of us have such histories. But it didn't make sense to me that her history of being sexually violated, which was not by a trans person, would somehow then lead to her conclusions about trans women in particular. And I understood her as making an association or maybe a displacement from one experience to another, imagining trans women as particularly dangerous, destructive, predatory, when statistically, historically, we can't find anything to support that. You could find an example, but then if you make the example into the norm, you've missed some steps in the reasoning, right?
The critical work, see? Yeah.
No, I mean, there's a place for patient thought, right? But then I thought, wow, there's so much sexual violation in the world, and how do any of us think clearly coming out of that? And it's not easy to think clearly, I think, in Israel and Palestine, given the losses that people have now experienced and what it will be like for the survivors. Like, what makes us think any of those people are going to be able to think well or clearly? How, and those who are in massive grief. You know, what kind of life is possible? So there are forms of care that I think we do need to develop for those of us who are wounded beyond healing. But what's going to be most important and what remains most important is not to flip the script, as it were, and to find our persecutors in places where they don't exist. It's a temptation, and it's also a fear, like this could come at me again, or this continues to come at me even when I know it's not here. It's coming at me all the time. The temporality of trauma is such that it's really hard to put it in the past. But there is a duty of care and mental health work, social and political and cultural work around trauma that does recognize it for what it is and allows it to be recognized as something that did, in fact, happen and that affects the ongoing life of the person. And I think it's within that frame that we can make better judgments or find our way toward a world in which that never happens to anyone again. Because that has got to be our commitment.
Yeah, never again.
Never again.
Meant for anybody, never again.
Yeah.
So with this, we have come to the end of this conversation.
Thank you, Sarah.
I would like to thank, first of all, Safa. Is Safa in the room, actually? No? I don't see Safa in the room. Safa El-Khanouchi? No?
Oh, we can still thank Safa in the air.
We can say, okay, we can. I would really like to thank Safa for a very meaningful essay that provided the starting point for today, and come back to one idea in particular from the quote I read earlier on, which is, only when we learn to appreciate the art of refusal can we truly feel at home. So that there is another kind of home that can be made where belonging is possible for everybody if we refuse the entitled claims to belonging, but understand that we owe each other the world. And that is the kind of ethics that you have developed and are keep on developing and sharing with us, and thank you for that. And I also want to thank all of you for joining us today and for your commitment, because we took notes of the names, we saw the hands, for your commitment to the work of critique and of strategizing and of imagination to make that other world possible. Thank you, of course, the SINGEL for setting up this conversation and this encounter. And then Judith, where to begin? With so much gratitude for all the intellectual work that you have been doing for so many years, always sharp and careful, visionary and staying with the trouble and the ambiguity, and moving with the times, also when the times are moving so relentlessly and dizzyingly fast, to give us enough of a grip on what is happening while providing us with anchors so that we're not swallowed by this tide. I think I'm not speaking only for myself, I think I'm speaking for everybody when we say we thank you.
You've been listening to the SINGEL Recordings, a podcast by the SINGEL. This episode was made by Jessie Bervoets and Maarten Buil and was carefully captured by Dominique Boy, Pieter-Jan Smit, Chris van Aert and Sam Verlinde. For more lectures, interviews and debates, keep an eye on our website.